So the last in this session is Dolf and Detken. And that's on the driving a digital university and an attempt to move from friction to flow. Dolf?
Thank you. Yes, colleagues, we're going to try to do a 20-minute presentation in 10 minutes, so in order to give us enough time for discussion. Okay, so while we wait for the technology to set up, the theme of the presentation is literally there's a hidden message in the theme. The whole issue of friction the concept of friction imply that something needs to be oiled. And that's the message which we have in our presentation, and I will explain to you. Good. Okay, so we chose a theme, and I've heard the previous speakers also speak about learning analytics, but we focus in this presentation on the value of data in the modern digital university. So, last week, I walked past a student walking down the stairs. And I asked her to turn around, and she turned around, and I took a picture of her. Of course, I showed her the picture just to show that I'm not influencing her privacy. But there are two messages in that picture, and I think you will understand the messages as we go through the presentation. You see, data in higher education, because higher education is not isolated from the rest of the world, data already plays an immense role in every aspect of our life. And the literature and even the real case studies show the value of data to be transformative, to be radical, to be an enabler for decision-making processes. But it's also an exposing aspect, and expose practices, real practices. So we listened to a few presentations the last few days, and we talked about online learning. And we share about the use of the LMS or any other education technology. But what happened if we open up the bonnet of the car? How does the engine really look like? What's really happening below the scenes? Therefore, we use a metaphor which being often thrown out as these hypes. Data is the oil of the information science environment. It is the most important aspect to think upon. And yet, we reflect on that in the educational environment, and we all know education has the tendency to be behind international trends, and always a few years behind. And then there's always the big brother concerns and the philosophical approach and concerns about intrusion of privacy and so forth. And yet, in a few days, the European General Data Protection Regulation comes into effect, and that will impact to some extent higher education in South Africa. And yet, we are complex adaptive systems, and that we've heard a few times during the last few days. So we live in a tension between what's happening in the globalized world and higher education. And higher education needs to react to what's going on outside of its boundaries. And yet, it needs to act on what's going internally within its boundaries, within its domains, research, teaching and learning, community services, and so forth, not even to talk about all the other trends. And in our context, we all know the sad story. And being referenced in Antoinette's opening remark, I think I've picked it up in a few remarks. DHET recently published 2 white papers indicating the dropout rates of students of a cohort of 10 years. And it boils down to, let's make it very simplistic, 50% of students not making it on a 10-year cohort cycle. And the 10-year cohort cycle is due to the fact that we need to include the distance education students also, UNISAs of the world and so forth. So if you take that into consideration, this is the recent one, and there you can see how the progression and dropout rates increase. If you look at, example, the first one, year 2000, you can see 47% completed the degrees after 10 years. It gives you a 50+% dropout. And if you ever have done the calculations, and I sat next to a US University of Stellenbosch colleagues, and we spoke about scenarios of financial implications of these figures. It's not only financial implications, it's emotional implications, it's family implications. You know the ecosystem supporting students these days to be successful in higher education. And then there's the trends analysis. You know, all the buzzwords out there from the Educors, the Gardeners of the world. And they tell us the same message. And the same message is simply, student success is a high priority. And it's not only on the technology front, it's also on the teaching. We've heard about the change of the academic focus to be a teacher and to focus on teaching success. And I'm so hesitant to ask a question here. And I thought I must, and I mustn't, must I? So other side I'm going to do. Reflect on your own institution, the academics here. How many of you have got in your performance output agreement student success? And if you have, and you're fortunate to have, what is the priority of that? And then we want to embark on online and hybrid models, and we want to promote student success. So what are we contracting for? So, learning analytics, a buzzword. It's there. It's new. It's not new. It's just purely using the process of research, the cycle of research, using data, and integrate that into teaching and learning. We've got a high level of maturity across all institutions in the world. So I thought I'm just going to briefly, in the few minutes I've got left, and I'm going to reduce my presentation dramatically, talk about the challenges if you want to scale institutional adoption of data to impact your student success initiatives, if you have student success initiatives, if it's institutional student success initiative, or is it a one or two willing lectures behind the scenes caring about their students, which we've heard a few times, the caring aspect. A few case studies of success, different levels of success, what models are applied to institutionally adopt learning analytics, and what are we doing at the University of Pretoria so far? And by all means, we're also early in the process. So what are the challenges? You've got data, you've got resources and skills. And when it comes to data, it's about governance, it's about centralizing of data, it's about validity, reliability, availability of data. It's about silo mentality. No, this is my data. You're not allowed to integrate it with your system. It's about resources and skills. We all know this, and it's being told that the sexy job of the future is a data scientist, and that will be replaced by, in any case, by machines, artificial intelligence. Policies and processes, and we hear this so beautiful. The lady's name is thrown to us every year and there, Popia, or Poppy. You know, that new lady, she's going to be with us. Are we prepared for her? We are, by the way, prepared for her, and we're working as a community on that. Then there is the culture, the most difficult thing to change. I'm repeating, the most difficult thing to change is the culture. And it's culture at different levels. So, where are there good examples to follow? And if you want to read about it, go and look at the Open University of the World. So I'm starting from the bottoms up there. Open University of the World, really in deep trouble about their massive amount of dropouts. They were nearly, and in fact, I think I may be wrong here, but they were nearly bankrupt. So they turned the ship around using data, but they've got a rich history of data. Since the 70s, they identified big data as a massive concern. Then our friends at Maryland, and I think the UJ colleagues also know John and his team. They started way back with LMS, Check My Activity, give the students the power to monitoring their own progress. What I appreciate about our colleagues in Nottingham is they said, you know, there are different types of data you can use. And we perceived every student as equal. When they walk through that gate, we ignore their biographical history, we ignore what they bring to the campus, then it's about engagement. And do we allow them to engage, and can we track their engagement in a positive sense, not in a negative sense? And then it all started with the Purdue signal system, who's being now changed through many cycles, being bought by a company, but Purdue ignored it, and now they're developing again their own early warning system. And there are many. I haven't even included the Australian examples here. So these things are happening out there. And if you go, the generic theme across these institutions is the dependency on online education. So models. This model specifically show you the student cycle model, university or open university model. All these things are available in the literature in any case. You can see that it follows the university of the student cycle. Where's your data entry points? Where's your data in your first engagement with a student? Going through what data tools do you provide? Who do you provide it to? What are they doing with it? How do you measure data on the use of data so you enforce, and it goes back to the bottom part of the cycle, to enable then the interventions thereafter? How do you measure your interventions? Another is a sophistication model. And there's a Siemens and colleagues model. And they just show you where you lie on the horizontal or vertical axis on your sophistication, and what is important to reach sophistication. But, one of the most famous models is the old second, Greller and Drasler, who spoke about the different dimensions which plays an impact. And if you look, the internal limitations, external constraints, objective, what do you want to achieve? And it all boils down on the strategy. What do you want to achieve? And the literature tells us that those institutions with high dropouts have got, of course, a student success target, whereas those institutions with a really good throughput, they focus on the total holistic picture of learning. How do you improve your learning? How do you improve your processes? And then the change management. Beer Norris model of how do you go through a cycle of change management? Who's involved? How do you start? Smart piloting, you increase that, you test, you retest, you talk, you communicate, you get all your stakeholders involved. The holistic picture, not singular focus, a holistic picture. Again, EduCourse has done research, and they plot the maturity index. And at our South African or second South African Higher Education Learning Analytics Conference in 2014 or 15, we've done this with a few institutions, and it works, to go through the maturity adoption. And it boils down to the dimensions which needs to be involved. And then each of those dimensions is on a continuum of maturity. You see there, it's defined, managed, and optimized. And they measure the average of the institutions involved, and again, Western institution, Canada, and so forth. There's an increased awareness in higher education of the value of data. So if you map all these, you get the same key messages. And I put there the question mark at the bottom, because the key messages there specifically focus on, let's say, non-teaching and learning-related issues. Whereas teaching and learning-related issues, in my mind, the design, the support, the priority of teaching and learning, the data you have is the most critical factor in all of them. So I think I'm going to end off before I hand over to Detken with the next two slides. The Australians have done empirical research, and Australia is really strong as a community. They've got a national community, and that's what we tried with the Sahela group, which is now integrated in the South African institutional research community, the SAA community. We've had our 5th meeting in maybe last year, and now this year we integrated with SAA. And it's all about, because we are a complex adaptive system, you cannot isolate one stakeholder to another. You've got two poles, and that is your context, which you applied, and your data activity. And then who's involved in the middle layer to enable that. And I think the last model I want to share have got that big green band in it. It's George Siemens and colleagues' model. And that model is about the conditions which need to be enabled. And guess what is the most critical condition? Yep. And not uptake, time, willingness, priority, and we want to do it. And it goes through strategic capability, academic willingness, useful instruments, data into your face. So it's about institutional, but it's also about operational things. So we as a university decided to focus on our own institutional students as key teaching and learning. We haven't jumped on the trend boat. We focus on our student success. And there we put all our effort in. And what we do is we use all our means, and we started last year to focus on to improve our student success rates. We want to use the technologies or the teaching and learning technologies to contribute to that, impacting on classroom activity, not isolating of data sources, integrating of data sources, so that we can reflect on the future, but also look to the reflect on the past, also look to the future. We've got numerous student success projects. We try to coordinate data across the different support areas, academic support, teaching and learning, and so forth. We're piloting academic predictive analytics and learning analytics in this year, following suite of in UJ's steps there. We expand our metrical development course, which Detken is going to speak to you in a few minutes. And we do provide our deans and deputy deans with cohort now in front of them data. And that's what we try to do. So that's a dashboard, just an example of the deans and deputy deans dashboards which you give to them. But at operational level, due to the importance of our academic staff, I'm going to ask Detken to share with you a brief overview of what we do to train our academic staff.
Thank you, Dolf. Good morning, everyone. So, making things move on the floor at the coalface is really different from putting everything in the background in place to actually be able to use the data. So we developed a course that we call the metrical course. The words measure, track, and impact through analytics were used to create this wonderful term. And we have a 4-hour interactive workshop. I know some people think 4 hours is too much, but usually when we finish, they tell us, but you've only touched the surface. And unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast. So we look at the data in the learning management system and how the lecturers can use that for the interventions and student support. And then we have our lecturers plan a little bit on their own practice and environment, what they want to use. You can see there are a few course information examples on the screen. Those little things that look like a heartbeat actually indicates the student's activity in the class. So if you have a flatliner student, you know that that one needs your attention quickly. So within our training, we also focus very strongly on student success and the different elements that tend to highlight on that. And every time we do our training, we actually link everything to this so that the lecturers can see how each of these activities that we promote to them is linked to student success. Within the metrical course, we decided there's a strong focus on the support part as well as the evaluation of what your students are busy with and how they are using what you have created in the system. There is a very strong need for the lecturers to realize that if there's nothing within the LMS, they cannot use anything. There is no data to actually use and act upon. So we designed a little case study to humanize the data and to make things real. If it's not really real, it's only a lot of graphs, and what do these graphs tell you? So we started off with a father there. You have him in the middle, the little face of Mr. Singh, phoning the lecturer, the lady here on the left, and he phones her and tells her, but I've got a fantastic daughter who's been doing very well in all the subjects except in yours. What is the matter? And then this lecturer goes into the system and starts looking at what is happening to her student. This lecturer uses the grade center, and in there she can get in a lot of information about the student. Although she's never accessed the learning management system, she's handed in an email and emailed us an assignment, and she got a reasonable mark for that. And she's got a mark for something that was done in classroom, but she's still failing the module. So then she starts wondering, but how can this student actually operate without being in the system? She sends her an email and asks her what's the matter. No reply. 2 days later, she phones Avi Singh, that beautiful lady on the right-hand side. She asks her, what's the matter? What's going on? And she learns that this student is living in a flat all by herself. There's no data. She doesn't have access to data. And that this student is scared to walk at night after class in the dark to her flat. So she doesn't stay and work in the labs that are on campus. So she now understands the situation in which the student is. And this sparks then in this lecturer's mind question marks about the rest of her students, and she starts using the different tools that is available within the system to actually follow up on what her students are doing. She uses the grade center to code and mark which students are problematic. She uses the performance dashboard to see which students are actually doing things that she's put online. She sets up a few rules in the retention center so that the system can warn her where there are students who are not performing as they should, and she uses these data very carefully. And then comes her HOD on the right-hand side, and he asks her what is happening with Avi Singh, and she starts giving him the data. This is what's happening with the student, this is what's happening with the rest of my class. And then somewhere in the mix, the dean was at one of Dolf's meetings. Now suddenly he has to produce data. He gets onto the heads of his HODs. The HODs get off on all the staff members. Where's the data? And suddenly everything that's in the system starts making sense to the lecturers, and they start using it. This whole story is intermixed then with all the reports that are available in the system, how to use it, how to interpret it. And we've received very good feedback on this course, and lecturers start to get a bit more positive about using the system.
Just to add to that, in my last conclusion, I know we're out of time, JB, but just to add to that, we also used the data, unfortunately, for unforeseen circumstances. Being one, I received a call from our security agents. Can you tell me if the student accessed the LMS because he's missing for 2 weeks? Another in for disciplinary hearings and so forth. So unfortunately, it's got a positive and it's got its other valuable. Last few comments on conclusion. I'm going to end off with the last three. You cannot embark on any hybrid online model without a focus on data. It's mission impossible. There's no instruction manual for this. There's nothing. There's the systems, but it's institutional. It's new skills. It's vital. Leadership at different levels and so forth. So that is what we think is important for the African Digital University. It's all the nice things, but what are we doing with what we have? Advertisement break. I spoke to that Up to You group. We have our full flexible future. We have Sir, Doctor, Professor, OBE, and I know what, Peter Cochrane, expert in artificial intelligence, as our keynote. We will share this with the colleagues and all the reference available. Thank you so much, and I do apologize for being over time.